The courtroom was packed, the air thick with tension as the judge prepared to render his verdict. At the back of the room, a black woman named Olivia Carter sat quietly, observing the proceedings with a calm but piercing gaze. She wasn't just any spectator, she was here for a reason. She had been following this case closely, and what she had seen so far was deeply troubling. The entire trial had been one-sided, with clear favoritism toward the two white police officers on trial for excessive force. She had seen it before. The judge barely glanced at the evidence that contradicted the officers' claims, dismissing crucial testimonies and video footage. The prosecutor, clearly aware of the bias in the room, hesitated to push too hard. It was obvious to anyone paying attention this case was being rigged in favor of the officers. But Olivia wasn't just paying attention, she was about to change everything. As the judge droned on, she noticed a uniformed officer near the door, repeatedly glancing in her direction. At first, she ignored it, assuming he was simply scanning the room. But then his gaze lingered, his expression shifting from observation to intent. He squared his shoulders as if emboldened by an unspoken command and walked straight toward her, his steps purposeful and unyielding. "You need to leave," he said, his voice low but firm. Olivia frowned. "Excuse me? This trial is closed to unauthorized personnel. You're not supposed to be here," he continued. A few heads turned, but Olivia remained calm. "This is a public courtroom," she replied evenly. "I have every right to be here." The officer's stand hardened. "Ma'am, I need you to step outside now." People were starting to whisper. Why was this woman being singled out? The judge, finally noticing the commotion, peered over his glasses. "What seems to be the issue, officer?" "She's refusing to leave, Your Honor," the officer said quickly. "She isn't supposed to be here." The judge gave Olivia a once-over, his lips curling in disapproval. "If law enforcement says you need to leave, then you need to leave." Olivia inhaled slowly, steadying herself. She knew exactly what was happening. A black woman sitting quietly in a courtroom, daring to observe without fear, made them uncomfortable. They didn't recognize her. They assumed she was just an outsider, someone without influence, someone easy to dismiss. But they had no idea who she was, no idea of the weight she carried, and no idea that today she wasn't leaving without making an impact. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, her fingers moving swiftly as she sent a single message. And then she waited. The officer huffed impatiently. "Let's go." But Olivia didn't move. She didn't argue. Instead, she straightened her posture, folded her hands in her lap, and locked eyes with the officer. Her voice, steady and unwavering, cut through the tension in the room. "I think you should answer your radio." The officer scowled, about to grab her arm when suddenly, his radio crackled to life. "Unit 4, stand down immediately," a voice commanded. The officer hesitated, confused. "Unit 4, do you copy? Stand down and escort Miss Carter with the utmost respect. She is not to be removed under any circumstances." The courtroom fell silent. The officer blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. Can you repeat that?" "This is the White House Communications Office," the voice continued. "Miss Olivia Carter is to remain in the courtroom as long as she pleases. Any action taken against her will be met with severe consequences. A senior representative from the administration is on the way." Murmurs erupted across the room. The judge's face drained of color. The prosecutor froze mid-sentence. The officer, who just seconds ago had been so eager to force Olivia out, stiffened in horror. The White House. All eyes turned to Olivia. She sat completely unfazed, her expression unreadable. Finally, she stood. "I believe that clears things up." The officer stammered an apology, stepping back quickly, his face flushed with embarrassment. The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder, a wave of whispers spreading through the crowd as people exchanged bewildered glances. The judge shifted uncomfortably, adjusting his glasses as if searching for an escape from the sudden shift in power. His once firm demeanor wavered, and for the first time since the trial began, he looked uncertain about how to proceed. And then the door swung open. A sharply dressed man in a dark suit strode in, his White House credentials clipped to his jacket, the golden emblem gleaming under the fluorescent courtroom lights. His presence commanded immediate attention, the murmur in the room quieting as he moved with purpose. He walked straight to Olivia, nodding respectfully, his expression one of unwavering authority, before turning to the judge with a measured but firm stance. Miss Carter is a high-ranking federal official, he said smoothly. She's here on behalf of the administration. I trust that will not be a problem. The judge, who had been so eager to dismiss her earlier, now looked like he wished he could disappear. His mouth opened as if to argue, but under Olivia's unwavering gaze and the silent pressure of the federal official's presence, he hesitated. His confidence had evaporated. Of course not, he stammered, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. The man nodded, his expression unreadable. Good. Then let's proceed. Because from what I've seen, this trial requires closer federal oversight. His words carried a weight that sent another ripple of unease through the courtroom. The officer's lawyer glanced at his clients, his grip tightening on his briefcase. It was clear that the rules of this game had just changed, and not in their favor. The courtroom was dead silent. The two officers, who had spent the entire case assuming the system would protect them, now looked absolutely terrified. And Olivia? She simply sat back down, crossed her legs, and smiled. Because justice was about to be served. The judge, still rattled, cleared his throat and glanced at the officers, who were now visibly sweating. Their lawyer fumbled with his notes, clearly thrown off by the sudden turn of events. The prosecutor, emboldened by the presence of federal oversight, straightened his posture and prepared to present his case with renewed confidence. The energy in the room had shifted. What was once a predetermined trial in favor of the officers had now transformed into something else entirely, a reckoning. Olivia knew the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about this case. It was about making sure cases like this one weren't swept under the rug anymore. She leaned back in her seat, her sharp eyes locked on the judge. The weight of the moment hung in the air, pressing down on everyone in the room. "Shall we continue, Your Honor?" she asked, her voice smooth but firm, yet carrying an unmistakable authority that made the judge shift uncomfortably in his chair. The judge, still pale, gave a stiff nod. "Proceed." And just like that, the fight for justice had truly begun. Outside the courthouse, news crews had begun to gather, the breaking news spreading like wildfire. Reporters whispered among themselves, trying to piece together what had just happened inside. Inside the courtroom, Olivia watched as the prosecutor, now confident in the fairness of the proceedings, laid out a powerful argument. Video evidence was replayed, showing what the judge had previously ignored. Witnesses who once hesitated now spoke with conviction, knowing that this time their voices would be heard. The defense attorney squirmed, realizing that the usual tactics wouldn't work under federal scrutiny. The officers, who once sat arrogantly, now exchanged nervous glances. Justice, long delayed, was finally in motion. But now, it surged forward like an unstoppable force, carrying with it the weight of every case that had been dismissed, every voice that had been silenced, and every truth that had been ignored. This was no longer just about a single verdict. It was about setting a precedent, ensuring that those who abused their power could no longer hide behind a broken system. And as the courtroom doors remained open for the world to see, Olivia knew this was just the beginning.